Hi, guys. Welcome back to Voiced Vulnerabilities, where we're vulnerable about our mental health and personal experiences. Before jumping into this episode, I just wanted to give an announcement about a certain thing that I'll be doing for this podcast. As you guys probably know from the news, there has been an increase in Asian hate crimes. And there's a lot of Asian communities, unfortunately, grieving their losses and also feeling extremely unsafe. So, for every listen of this podcast, I'll be donating to the Community Action Fund, and it's organized by Hate is a Virus. And I can link down all the description below and the details. So share this with your friends, your family, and on your social media. Let's try to hit as many donations as possible and try to help this initiative. So thank you. Yeah, so today I have an extremely special guest, and I think is also very appropriate with the funds that we'll be raising because that is exactly what we'll be kind of diving into. So, would you please introduce yourself shortly for the listeners?
Of course, yeah. Hi, I'm Erandi. I am a first year student at the University of Amsterdam studying PPLE. That is a mouthful, but it's politics, psychology, law, and economics for indecisive people that don't know what to do with their lives. And I'm really happy to be here. And it's love. I mean, I would say it's lovely to meet you, but it's lovely to meet you online
Yeah,
and
face to
get
face,
the
kind of.
opportunity. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great that, I mean, I think it is great that we can still, like, the one upside is that we can talk to people from all over the world because of
Hmm.
like the online push that the pandemic forced us into.
That's so true.
Um, and I'm just glad that we have the opportunity to talk about this. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So you are from Sri Lanka, if I'm not wrong, and um, I guess that's kind of related to what we'll be talking about because I'm also from Korea and we're both Asians. You're South Asian, I'm East Asian, and we wanted to just dive into the atmosphere and just how it's stigmatized in our communities and just try to like spread more awareness about this, and also if there are any other Asians out there that you're not alone in it. So Arandi, could you explain maybe like what was the atmosphere around like emotions and mental health in your household?
Okay. Wow. So I feel like that's a difficult question to answer because um, it was always, I feel like my family at least was emotionally sensitive, but in a weird way, because I felt like we were willing to be there for each other, but we didn't know how to talk about our problems. And I feel like that is just a lack of understanding that we had about ourselves, and also a lack of, I think it's something that's ingrained in our larger culture where like we just don't know how to discuss personal issues, and we don't also know what exactly we're struggling with in order to be able to kind of articulate it to other people. And I feel like because of that, there were just a lot of things that were unsaid even within our family that we've carried for years. And I feel like because of that, I grew up learning to do the same thing, and it took a lot of effort and a lot of relearning in order for me to be able to even open up to my friends, in order for me to trust people with parts of my life that I thought I shouldn't even be thinking about, shouldn't even be talking about. So I feel like um, it's not that people are necessarily emotionally insensitive. And I definitely didn't come from a background where people were rude or mean about
Mhm.
struggles that they were facing. It's just that we didn't know how to deal with it. And we were never taught how to, and we didn't have systems that taught us that were accessible to us. And I feel like that's still a pretty big gap in Asian communities. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. Like the big problem is that, as you said, we don't know ourselves, right? We don't even know how to process our emotions. Our parents weren't taught how to like recognize these emotions. A lot of them were taught to just ignore it. And a lot of the times for me, my parents grew up in households where negative emotions were just a bad thing and something that you had to ignore. It was a sign of weakness if you showed it. And as you
Yes.
said, that whatever your household and whatever your family, um, kind of how they dealt with mental health, you internalize that to yourself. And that was also very true for me, because I started labeling negative feelings as something that was so taboo, something that I could not ever like share to my friends. And I am still relearning, like you are, to open up to my friends. It is still extremely hard, and much harder because the first belief system that you build is from your family. And that first foundation is the hardest thing to kind of break. Um, but it it's definitely something that we should all work towards, because this piling up of emotions and not recognizing it, as we both probably know, can lead to a lot of mental health struggles and mental health problems, um, which would definitely be much more alleviated if we knew how to address our emotions and knew how to address like that we need help.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I feel like there's also an angle we're discussing about the kind of generational progress that we've had with mental health. I feel like it's something that's definitely talked about a lot more. And it's something that I feel like I think we're technically Gen Z kids, but with the millennial movement, I feel like with each generation, we've just been addressing it a lot more with social media. It's also a lot easier, but that also means that we are dealing with the burden of bringing it forward as an issue. And it means that we are trying to reconcile that gap between us and our parents that didn't have this exposure, that didn't have maybe the courage, the confidence, or the support to deal with it. And I feel like that means that we also have a lot of pressure on our side to not only address the issue within ourselves, within our own generation, but also to try and help people that still don't know how to deal with this, that were taught that you shouldn't deal with it, that you were supposed to just like sweep it under the rug. And I feel like that also means that in families, you usually have the children carrying a lot of the weight with mental health issues because they can't talk about their own. And sometimes their parents' issues are kind of deflected onto them as well. And that leads to a lot of turbulence. And I just feel like that's also an angle that's not talked about enough in the conversation surrounding mental health.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah.
That Yeah, I'm glad that you addressed that, because yeah, you're right, because there's such a big gap between like our parents' generation and our generation, especially also because of globalization and how much like our parents' generations were taught to work hard, and that was just how they had comfort. But a lot of us, we kind of are born into the comfort. This might be a generalization, but it just um, it just kind of does put the pressure on us to, first of all, as you said, address address our own like internalized narratives within us. But at the same time, we have to kind of address that to our parents, teach it to our parents, and at the same time have the responsibility that you have to share all of this to your like Asian friends or like the Asian community and around. So yeah, that's so true. Like Gen Z, like kids, or even like Gen Z Asian kids, you guys have a lot of pressure on your shoulders. And I think that involves us too. So yeah, just I feel like if you are if you really relate to having this responsibility, um, take care of your mental health, please. There are certain there are more people that will probably be on board to spreading awareness, and you don't have to do that alone. Like just look out online and see who you could collaborate with and who you can work with in spreading the awareness. It's not only something that you have to carry.
Yeah, I think that that's a really important message because of the lack of discussion that we have around these issues, especially in Asian communities. I feel like a lot of people feel like they're going through what they're going through alone. And the reality is that we're all struggling because we don't talk about it. And because of that, we don't know just how much of an issue it is and how common it is among the entire community, that it's something that everyone deals with. And that just perpetuates it even more. But I feel like that's why conversations like this are just really important, because it encourages you, even if you aren't ready to take action, even if you aren't ready to seek help, to go online, read more about it, at least it lets you know that you're not alone. And I feel like that's honestly probably the most important starting step when it comes to these kind of issues.
Yeah. And just as us trying to take care of our mental health and address it within ourselves, we are already kind of stopping that bad cycle of ignoring our emotions. Because if you can address your emotions, and you probably like later, if you have kids, they will kind of be able to like mirror that, and they will learn how to be much more recognize emotions much more and how to express them much more. So even working on yourself, I'm saying, is enough, and it will reap like long-term consequences. But talking about working on ourselves, what was the process like for you trying to understand mental health by yourself, not having like any background or any like parental figures who were aware of it?
Yeah, that was just really hard. So I feel like I I mean, I'm really grateful that I have like a little bit of psychology in my degree when it comes to times like this. But I genuinely grew up in a background where we just didn't discuss mental health as a concept. And I wasn't exposed to it until I was in my final years of high school. I didn't even know what depression was until I think 2 years ago, when I thought that one of my friends was struggling with it. And I did my own research to try and learn about what this mental illness was, how I can help. And I feel like there's a lot of people that kind of, even in our generation, especially because of social media, just like throw around terms like depression and anxiety, but they don't really know the weight that it carries. They don't know what it means, what it entails. And I feel like it's not just them that's to blame, it's the fact that we don't have enough education about it. We aren't really taught about what it is in school. It's not addressed enough in our educational systems, in our daily conversations, in any, I don't know, any societal experience that we have. I feel like growing up in Asia, I was just not really allowed to explore that part of myself, and I wasn't allowed to explore that concept until very recently. And because of that, I think I took it upon myself, and it took a long time for me to come to terms with the fact that mental health is a real thing that we should care about, that actually has a significant impact on people's lives. And I feel like I still struggle with it, because I sometimes catch myself kind of belittling my own problems. I catch myself kind of sidelining mental health, and it's difficult. And I feel like it's coming from this kind of background, this kind of context. I feel like it's constantly going to be a journey of catching yourself, correcting yourself, and teaching yourself that that's not okay, that it is something that you should engage with. Um, and I just think it's really important to take that step for yourself when you don't have a community that brings it to you. Um, and well, this also made me think about, because you asked me about my journey, I really only started, I think, accepting the fact that I had mental health issues when I first went to Amsterdam, because I think just because of how drastic the change was, and because a lot of things were happening at once that I had to adjust to, with the pandemic, with the move, with homesickness, with living on my own for the first time in my life. I felt like all of that kind of projected all my like I think my mental health issues kind of manifested because of that. And I realized that it was something that was very real, that I had been neglecting for a long time. And engaging with that at first was so difficult, because I feel like growing up, everyone is inevitably exposed to some kind of trauma because our world is just like far from perfect. It's inevitable, I think. And when you're taught to internalize it, to just shut it away instead of being encouraged to engage with it, to discuss it, and to just heal from it, it's really difficult to accept that you have a problem. And I think the second step is to identify what the problem is. Then I kind of went on this road of what I like thought of as 5 steps, which was I accept that you have a problem. Secondly, identify a problem. Thirdly, accept that you need help. Fourth, find a therapist that works for you. And then fifth, just like get better. And I feel like the problem that I learned when I reflected on this later on was just that people kind of discuss mental health as this linear progression. Like they say, you have this issue, and these are the things you need to do in order to get better, in order to deal with it. And I feel like the reality is just very different because it's not a linear progression. There's a constant amount of back and forth between step 1 and 2 and step 3, and then you come back to 1 again. So I feel like that's something that isn't talked about enough when you have mental health conversations, because there are resources and we can work on making those resources more accessible. But the reality is that depending on the background, the exposure that you have to these issues, it's just going to be very difficult for you to even accept that you have a problem. And then it's even more difficult for you to trust that someone is going to be able to help you get through it. And I feel like that's just where I'm at personally, where I'm constantly trying to move forward, but it's never just, exponential growth. It's
Yeah.
always going to be like, sorry, I've been studying econ, so it's like this, just an up and down, the troughs and the whatever the down one is. But that's I think a journey that a lot of people have, but it's not a journey that's reflected accurately, I think, when you talk about mental health, because you just talk about recovery, you talk about what you did to get better, but you don't talk about how difficult it was to get better and how sometimes you went back to the beginning
Yeah.
and you felt even worse than you
Yeah.
were when you started. Yeah,
Yeah. Sometimes I would say deciding to recover is harder than ignoring it, because it
definitely.
means you're facing your fear like full on and working towards like eradicating or working together with it to unlearn it. It's like facing the truth. And a lot of people actually live their lives not wanting to face the truth because it hurts so much. That analogy of that, like if you have a wound, it's much more painful if you open it up and like like dig within to
Yep.
kind of root it out. I know that's like very like explicit image, but it really does hurt that much if you do like decide to start recovering. So you're so right that there's this misrepresentation sometimes that, oh, like once I recognize that I have a problem, it's all up from there. It's not that.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna have doubts because you've had all these narratives inside of you, all these beliefs inside of you that mental health is not even a concept, and it's just going to come back and like kind of like haunt you, like for a long time. But that's not trying to be discouraging. It just means that you need to push much more. If you've been growing up in a background where these things were instilled in you, you just need to fight back much more. And it takes a long time, it does, but the more you fight it and the longer you fight it, you change your own narrative. And honestly, that is what is like the ultimate goal in recovery, is to change the way you view yourself, the world, and this recovery process. And yeah, like how you mentioned about um, how a lot of the things were kind of underlying, everyone has their own trauma, but for you it was manifested by like living alone and kind of being abroad without much support. um, and it was kind of the same for me, where there was like an underlying problem, and within our family it was kind of dysfunctional with emotions and expressing them, um, not wanting to share any like feelings anymore, and the communication kind of being very bland because of it. And yeah, like when I moved to Amsterdam, and as you was it was the first time like moving abroad without any friends or just anyone that I knew. Um, it exploded, I guess. And because it was serious, like my parents started noticing, like, oh, maybe this is a problem. But it still took like a whole year because they didn't even know what an eating disorder was. They didn't even know that
Oh,
it existed. So for them, it was just like, oh, like why don't you just eat more, or like, just comments like that, because they truly just didn't know that existed. As you said, like in
yeah.
school, like we aren't taught mental health. We're taught like, yeah, we're taught math and like English, but we're not taught like the things that are so like deeply like inside of us that affect us so much in all facets in life. Like
Yeah,
um, school doesn't teach us that, which is kind of bizarre for me. And I feel like there needs to be so much more like awareness within like educational institutions for this. Um, but yeah, like if we are in schools that don't teach that, like imagine our parents' generations.
exactly.
Yeah. And
It must have
how,
been so much more difficult for them because I think we're lucky that we have, so we're in the age of information. And I feel like we're lucky that we are able to Google something if we don't know it. And maybe we'll have outlets that we can find that our parents just didn't have access to, that their parents didn't have access to. And I'm sorry, I think doors are slamming because it's raining here.
it's okay. It's fine. We keep it very honest here, all the background noises too.
But yeah, and I think that that's something that we just have to, I think it is a privilege to be able to have the information that we
Mhm.
have. And I think that's worth acknowledging because it's not, you can't blame the generation before us for not knowing how to deal with it because they didn't have the skill set either. I feel like it's everyone at, it's us as a society that needs to evolve, that needs to tackle this head on. And you can't really, that's the hard part and the annoying part sometimes, that you can't just be mad at your parents. Sometimes you can't just hate on a generation for not knowing how to address it because it's a systemic issue.
Mhm.
um, and we are a little bit luckier than they were because we have social media, we have
Mhm.
some kind of outlet that at least gives us the
Yeah.
resources to do things for ourselves.
Yeah, totally. Um, and about like how I said before, like a lot of the previous generations, at least for my generation in Korea, they had to work their way up. It was just constantly working. And they didn't have any space to even think about how they were doing in their mental health. It was just not in the picture because what they were doing was work, 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 get money so that we can survive. And when surviving is their main thing, just mental health goes out of the window. So you're totally right when you say that we can't blame our parents. It's not their fault that they were raised in an environment like that. And as you said, it's such a systemic, like a much more bigger societal problem. And I feel like um as a generation who has much more access to it, we have so much power to actually be more for to actually break the stigma. And I think blaming our parents actually kind of does the opposite of helping with breaking the stigma, because what we want to be is compassionate people to our parents, and kind of us opening up first and understanding them and being the example of how to listen and how to accept a person, and how it must have been hard not to open up. And it it's going to be a long journey, like trying to be much more open and honest with your parents, and also vice versa, your parents being honest to you, because they've been living their whole lives not knowing that this was existing. And how can someone in their 40s and 50s really accept something that hasn't been existing for their like whole lives? It's
Yeah,
like, imagine how shocking it would be for them to suddenly have to accept everything and adapt to this new system. It's super confusing. And um the older you get, the less flexible you are.
definitely.
So compared to us, where we can be much more flexible in accepting things and changing our narratives, for them, because the narratives were so much more ingrained and were with them with a longer time, it's part of their identity. So trying to root it out is kind of like losing their identity, you know?
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah, and you just need to be compassionate with your parents. And I'm also working on this because I tend to like blame my parents of like, why did you not um like try to show more love, or why did you not try to express your love, and why did you constantly negate my feelings? That was kind of my first reaction. That was my first route. But the more that I thought about it, and the more that I thought about this whole like systemic problem, um it's just not the way to go. And I feel like, as I said, compassion would be the way to really extend to our parents. And honestly, even if we try our best, there might be cases where it doesn't work, because it's just a really hard problem to root out. But that doesn't mean that you need to stop your own progress. You can still work on yourself. um,
Yeah, of course, definitely. I
yeah.
think that's I think that's very true. And just like piling on to the point on how you can't really blame a generation and blame a community for not being able to address this before. I feel like it's important to also address the angle that um, especially for just the Asian region and like South Asia, East Asia, I feel like there's like something very specific to our demographic and the context that we exist in that make it so much more difficult to engage with mental health. Because like you said, when you were talking about how our parents and people before them were just so focused on working in order to like live, I feel like that's something that's just very closely associated and attached to Asian culture, because you talk about this concept that I learned called grind culture, where you're just constantly focusing on work, you're constantly focusing on success, on elevating your quality of life and your family's quality of life. And I feel like that's something that's very specific to our demographic. And it's something that means that a lot of people that live in our region are not as privileged as people that have to work really hard in order to have a good life. And I feel like that automatically means that you belittle anything else that seems like even vaguely like a luxury. And I feel like that's also why I was thinking about how difficult it is for people to seek help. And I feel like it's something that I've internalized as well, because I think I'm a very stingy person when it comes to spending my own money. And that's something that's been ingrained in me. And I think it's because I grew up in a background where we were always trying to save every buck that we could. And we were always trying to work as much as we could to always work our lives up to a better stage. And I feel like that's um, why we have this narrative that mental health isn't as much of a problem. It becomes a first world issue. And because of that, there's this idea that your individual problems are something that you can't really afford to be bothered with. And it's something you shouldn't look into as an individual from a third world country or just from a lower economic class, because you have other pressing concerns like, I don't know, your physical health or financial problems, or maybe you have a family to take care of. And while all of those things are valid, I feel like it's really important that people understand that it doesn't mean you shouldn't like that you should deprioritize your mental health because of it, which is something that a lot of people do and something that I've personally done as well. And the problem is that your mental health is so intrinsic to how you function that it could negatively affect all the other areas of your life that you do care about. And I feel like that's just an issue that we have in our community because of the culture that we have, because of the circumstances that we're in, and because of the very real economic issues that we have to deal with every day.
Yeah.
And I feel like grind culture is actually a manifestation of our inability to just listen to our needs, because it's about overworking, it's about pushing yourself too far, taking on insane amount of hours at work, and prioritizing material success over getting enough sleep or eating on time or something like that. And I know that I'm guilty of it too. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to doing that. And I feel like it also encourages you to drown yourself in work when you just don't want to think about your problems, or you don't want to actually engage with something that's been bothering you in the back of your mind. You just kind of erase your issues by completely diving into a workload that you cannot handle. And I feel like on that same tangent, the idea that therapy is something that isn't just a free service, it isn't something that is very accessible to begin with, but the fact that it's something that you have to pay for, that is usually pretty expensive, something that I think a lot of some health insurance policies don't even cover. And the reality is, I think even if they do cover it, even if you do get coverage, it can amount to being something very expensive. And that just furthers the narrative that seeking help is a luxury, it's a privilege, it's something that you don't really need to do. And I feel like that's also something that's worth discussing. And I don't think it's the fault of therapists, because they do very important work. They do deserve the pay that they get. It's just a narrative that I think needs to be discussed, because I've realized that I've internalized it too. Whenever I considered seeking help from the university, seeking help professionally, I feel like it's just one more reason for people to deprioritize doing it, to push it aside a little bit and procrastinate, because they're like, oh, I can't afford to pay for that right now. And I feel like it's also worth talking about the other resources that you have, even if you realistically can't afford to, because there are online resources available now. And there are a lot of websites that you can use to just find a community that you can talk to if you really feel like you can't afford to go see a therapist and you need help. So I just wanted to say that as well.
And it's so true that we kind of think that seeking help is a luxury for mental health, and this manifests the guilt, that we feel
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, I'm taking away this amount of money from our family just because of my individual problem, like this is so selfish of me. Like we got to think about the community and the bigger picture,
Yeah.
and I cannot afford to just think about myself. But if you really think about it, working on your own mental health helps the people around you so naturally. And I feel like this is a concept that a lot of Asian communities need to understand, is that if one person in your household has bad mental health, that will kind of drag down a lot of the things within that household. Vice versa, if your child has good mental health, then that would spread out infinitely. Like
Yeah.
yeah,
Positive multiplier.
exactly. So I do understand that there's this like ingrained thing that, oh, like there's so much guilt in trying to seek help. It's just so selfish of me. But like if you actually think about it, it does help the community too. Like if you are much more of like a collectivist culture, like that's an argument that you can use. You are eventually helping those around you. And it's not at all just you being selfish, just you being wanting to be happy. It's also wanting the people around you to be happy.
Yeah. And I think that it's not even that you're selfish. And I feel like that's something that we tell ourselves too. We're like, how dare we try and like talk about our problems and waste money on it when I could be spending it saving up for something else. But it's not selfish to want to have a stable mindset, to not want to be drowning in anxiety when you're going through something difficult. And I feel like it's just a basic, it contributes to your basic quality of life. And I feel like it's something that honestly all of us need to be able to just be comfortable with ourselves, to feel that we have security when we go through whatever experiences we go through. And that's also something that I think it takes a lot of work to unlearn, that it's not selfish to want to improve your mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's you just wanting stability and wanting to be satisfied with your life, a life that you're given once. And I think there is quite a negative connotation to selfish, because I think that all people need to be selfish to a certain
That's fair
extent, right?
too.
Because um yeah, like you are the only person that will um experience your life. You are the only person that will experience your feelings, and in a certain extent you should be selfish to wanting to improve all those experiences and that feelings that you have. And I think it's also that Asian communities and even just like everywhere, society deems that being selfish is a negative thing, when in reality it's a necessary thing, I would
It
say.
is. You are
um
so right.
yeah, and just with like the systemic problem of like mental health not even being covered by insurance, like I can attest to that because I'm having therapy sessions and also seeing a psychiatrist in Korea. None of them are covered by insurance, and it's really expensive. And honestly, if my parents weren't open enough to like do it, then I wouldn't have been able to get any help, because it was even hard for me to get help in the Netherlands, because not even every session is really covered in the Netherlands. It's very, very like complicated. So
Yeah,
I guess like if you are in a situation where you really do need that help and that investment, but your parents are against it, just show them how important this is to you. So for example, for me, I um first of all, I kind of reached out to my parents saying that, hey, like I am not able to do any of my schoolwork and I'm being serious. Like I explained to them everything that's going in my head, even though it's so scary to do that. I tell them like, hey, like these anxious thoughts like are affecting my daily life. I can't even like do the most like the simplest things ever. Like I'm not like me before. This is some serious problem, and me just constantly updating them on that kind of helped them realize that this was a real problem and a real thing that needed to be addressed. And yeah, I guess like also just starting this podcast was also a big thing, because you can't really start a podcast about nothing that doesn't have any value. So um it was really encouraging, because like my dad, he grew up in a household where he didn't like receive any love, and he didn't know how to like express emotions. Like it was just not a thing. Um so obviously that was like a narrative in him, and he passed that down to like me and like my brother. Um but encouraging thing was that ever since that, this podcast has been a thing, he's been listening to it and giving comments and
Oh,
feedbacks,
that's
because
amazing.
like if your daughter is focusing on this thing and is truly invested in it, then it must truly be something important to her, and it must be something that I should look more into. So like I feel like it really does start within us, of like really trying hard to make this a central piece of our lives and making that a reality. And once your parents witnesses that, oh, my daughter or my son is really putting a lot of his passion and effort into this. And like honestly, parents are will be there for you if you're passionate about something. They might say other like something otherwise like externally, but I feel like as parents, if you really show that you're invested in it, it becomes important to them. So I would
Yeah.
say don't give up just because there might be some discouraging comments, or because they might not be recognizing it in the first phase. I would say eventually they will come to recognize it if you yourself kind of make that a reality, that mental health is really important to you.
Yeah, you're right. And I think your podcast has been like really important for a lot of people, because I think especially, the because of the fact that we're going through this pandemic, I feel like a lot of people are struggling with issues, and realistically very few of them are coming forward with that. And I think the really cool thing about having a podcast or something that's just available for free that you might come across by accident is really brilliant because it kind of unconsciously allows people to engage with the fact that they have these problems. And it doesn't feel intimidating. It doesn't feel like they're being coerced into it. And I feel like it gives them a sense of community. And I feel like what you're doing with this platform is just, honestly, it's amazing.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, it just really started with wanting to, yeah, be honest with myself. I guess that was the start, because once I become honest with myself, others will be encouraged to be honest with themselves. And um I'm glad if it even helps like one person. And yeah, like I truly love this, like just doing this podcast. And yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. And I'm also really glad that you're here and you are also part of,
Glad to be here.
yeah, like spreading this awareness and spreading this love. Like it's amazing. um but yeah, do you have like any advice left maybe about how we could reach out to our parents, or how we could deal with trying to break the narratives? Like any personal advice or just general advice to the listeners?
I think the hardest thing that we can do and the most important thing that we can do is, I think, what we're trying to do here, which is start by talking about it. Because I know that mental health awareness is something that's been gaining traction, I think, over the last few years, but there's still so much to talk about. There's so many gaps just in the way we communicate about it. Even when we have awareness campaigns or when we have public talks about it, I feel like there's so many parts of it that are not discussed. And you can only come across it if more people come out and are willing to talk about it. And I feel like that's why it's probably the most difficult thing, but to just be open to voicing out your opinions and to having more conversations, whether it's opening up to like your close friends or doing something like this. I feel like it's important. And I feel like that'll also encourage people to realize that it's something that they're not struggling with alone, and that will help them in having those important conversations again with maybe the people that are related to their issues, or maybe the people that can support them through their issues, whether it be parents, like you said, or whether it be getting the courage to seek a therapist. And I think another important thing is to just know that because we do have the internet, it's, even if you feel like you're going through it alone, even if you feel like you can't talk to your parents about it, you're not ready, I feel like it's important to do your own research. And that doesn't just involve like reading Wikipedia pages about mental disorders. It means also just looking for resources online, because I recently discovered, I think I may be mistaken, but I think it's this website called Seven Cups. And they provide this platform where they have an automated system that allows you to just talk to people. And it's essentially a website which is a group chat. But I feel like there's so many things out there that people don't know because they don't think to look. And I feel like that's something that you could encourage people to do and that people should take upon themselves as well, because we have to acknowledge that we do have some tools that we can use
Mhm.
and use them, I guess.
Yeah, thank you so much for those last advice. And I guess we wanted to also touch base on like Asian hate crimes and how that's related to how mental health is stigmatized in the community. Because I remember you said that, like on our chat, that because a lot of people feel like they can't really be forward with their experiences with hate crimes, and it's kind of suppressed. It's just like something that they carry within themselves without like publicizing it, which is something that we need. We need more people coming forth saying, hey, this is how I feel about this. This is what I've experienced. But yeah, like what do you like have to add on to that?
Um, I've actually, yeah, I think I've been reading a fair amount about um, the shootings in Atlanta, and I feel like there's this interesting kind of place that Asian Americans have in the US as a demographic, which is the fact that they've kind of been almost invisible for, I think, decades, because there's definitely been a lot of racism, a lot of issues concerning their community, but because there are a lot of issues when it comes to other communities as well. And because I think the most prevalent is when you consider the Black community, or maybe even just immigration and immigrants. I feel like Asian Americans and the issues that they face, the hate that they face, has kind of been sidelined, kind of been an underlying thing that finally boiled over with the COVID-19 pandemic. I feel like it just kind of brought to life something that's been underlying for a long time. And because of that, I think I read an article that said that the amount of mental health issues that Asian Americans are struggling with in America, and I think just around the world, has actually just increased because of these shootings. And I think it's, again, like you just said, because of the fact that as a community, as individuals within this community, we already struggle with engaging with these issues, with accepting that we have mental health problems. I feel like when something like this happens, when there's a crisis on top of a pandemic, it just makes it impossible to want to deal with this and to know how to deal with this. And I feel like because of that, it's even more important to have these conversations. And I know that a lot of from what I've been seeing on social media, from what I've been reading about, I know that a lot of individuals that even vaguely identify with being Asian have had some kind of strong reaction to the fact that these shootings are happening. Because even if you don't live in America, I feel like it affects you. And I feel like it makes you question the world we live in. And that also leads to a lot of mental health problems. It leads to a lot of stress. And I feel like those are conversations worth having. And that's why I think I think this episode was important, even in light of the the Asian hate crimes that are happening. I feel like it's not just a societal problem, it's also a mental health problem.
That's so true. So yeah, let's get the conversation going and open up more about like our mental health, check up on, your Asian American friends if you have, or check up on your Asian friends and just try to see if they are suppressing anything and see if you can, bring up conversations, but much more subtly and not too strongly, because that could be a little bit intimidating. Might be,
Definitely.
yeah. But yeah, like as I said, let's bring more awareness. And if you would like to help, I would link like the fundraiser below. You can donate yourself too. But as I said, for every listen, I'll be donating to this fundraiser. And yeah, like I really like want to thank for the listeners that have come till here. Like you have officially helped donate to this cause. And yeah, I would like give an update with how everything goes. And yeah, thank you so much, Erandi, again, for
Thank
being a
you for having
guest.
me.
Yeah, I feel like we've had such a really good conversation that has been, as you said, like sidelined and overlooked.